Ciao friends! In this video, I want to show you a data modeling technique that lets you create one slicer that selects values from multiple columns. In more practical terms, my user want to have one slicer only from which they select a geographical name regardless of the role of the geographical name. So they want to choose Europe, and that selects all the customers in Europe. Now, Europe is a continent, but from the same slicer, they want to select Germany, that is a country, and that selects all the customers in Germany. Or Colorado, that is a state, and that selects all the customers in Colorado. Besides, they also want to put all these entities side by side in a chart. And this is where the scenario proves to be challenging. As you are going to see, we are not going to write a lot of DAX code. Here, the real hero is the data model. With the correct data model, this solution is straightforward, simple to implement, and extremely powerful. Now, it's much easier if we look at the demonstrate in order to understand exactly what we want to achieve. And then, step by step, we will build the entire solution. Let's get started. This is the final result that I want to obtain. You see that I have a selection that contains Colorado, that is a state, and then Portugal, Greece, and China, which are countries. And I put the entities side by side. China, Colorado, Portugal, and Greece, they are in the same chart. You could obtain a very similar result if you just use a hierarchical slicer. Here I have a hierarchical slicer that is working on the geographical hierarchy. In Asia, I selected China. In Europe, I selected Greece and Portugal. And in North America, I have selected Colorado. Now, the problem of this chart is that depending on the level of the hierarchy where you look at it, you have different numbers, and none of them is exactly what I want to obtain. Remember that what I want to obtain is China, Colorado, Portugal, and Greece side by side. But this is not what I obtain here, because if I look at the chart at the continent level, I only see continent data. If I drill down at the country level, I see country data, which is good for Portugal, Greece, and China, but it is not for Colorado, because Colorado is below this level. And if I drill further, then I can see Colorado, which is good, but I have also split China in all the different provinces of China. So I no longer have the aggregated value, I have the value split in different levels. You can obtain, again, the numbers if you look at the scenario using a matrix, but again, the values are scattered around the chart because China is at the second level below Asia, Colorado is at the third level in the hierarchy. So the values are there, I can look at them, but they are not nicely presented to the user. So the goal that I want to obtain is this chart. And from here, when the user builds the report, they can look at Asia, or they can choose Europe, that is a continent, or they can add Asia, which is again a continent, and all the values are present here. Besides, another important detail is that, look at that, I have Asia and China at the same time. China is one of the countries in Asia, but I can have the values of different levels of the hierarchy all together. To implement this solution, what we will need to do is first understand the data model, because the correct data model is of paramount importance in order to obtain the result that we need. Then we will implement the data model using DAX. You can obtain the very same result implementing the same data model in M-code using Power Query or in SQL or with whatever tool you have available. We will just use DAX because it is the simplest way to show the result step by step just by using Power BI. Let's take a look at the final data model, so what we need to obtain. We start again from here. We need a table from where we select the values in the slicer. This table needs to contain values coming from continent, from countries, and also from states all together, because that table needs to contain China, Asia, and Colorado in the same table. And I created this table that I called slicer. Slicer contains in the column selection all the different names that will need to be selected. But then the table by itself is not really enough, because a table containing the names is useless unless those names apply a filter to the customer table. Therefore, I will need more technical columns. Slicer needs to filter customer, so the filter needs to go from slicer to customer. And you can obtain the same result in a couple of ways. Here in this solution, slicer goes to another table country state that contains a set of columns that is able to filter the customer table. Or you can build a relationship straight between slicer and customer using the latest kind of relationship, which are many-to-many cross-filter relationships. We will build both solutions. But the important detail is that we have two problems to solve. First, creating the table containing all the names, and next, building the relationship between this table and the customer table. Once that is done, our solution will work with no further DAX code required. So the next step is that we open a model with no solution inside, and we create it step by step, starting from the slicer selection. Let's do that together. I have this model where I have everything ready except that I'm missing the tables. The first table that I need to create is the table that feeds the slicer. Now, it's not complex DAX code, but it's easier if we start with DAX Studio, because there we can look at the partial results. My table needs to contain continents, countries, and states all together in the same table. And I also want to rename the column because I want to name it selection. It's just a generic term. So we start with evaluate. We are writing a query, and we can also obtain a bit more space. Okay. We want to take let's start with the continents. I can use a select columns because I will want to rename the column. And from customer, I retrieve a new column that I call selection, which is the customer continent. If I run the query right now, you see that the result contains Asia kind of a lot of time. We don't want Asia to appear too many times, so we use these things around it. This way. And now we have Asia, North America, and Europe. We have the values of the continent. We need to add further values to it. We need to add also the countries. So we use a union around it. And from the same customer table, we also select, again calling selection, the country region. Let's close union. And now, after we run this first step, you see that we have in the same selection North Asia, North America, and Europe, that is the continent, but then we have all the names of the different countries. Finally, we want also the states. So in the same query, again inside union, we add as a selection not the country region, but the state. I run it again, and I have now all the different states: Wyoming, Ohio, Minnesota, and so on. This is the source of our slicer. Next step, we copy this table. Let me copy the code. And now we can create a new table in the model that we call slicer, where I put just my code. This is the first step. Next, I can take my selection and use it as the source of my filter. Now I can select from here Europe, and it works. I can choose Portugal, and I can choose China. I can choose any name from the selection of values that I grabbed. Obviously, right now nothing is happening, so if I choose names from the slicer, this is not filtering in any way my report. The next step is to make the filtering happen, but this requires a bit more reasoning. Let's do that together. you see that the slicer is not filtering customer. And if I look at my report, I add the slicer here. Slicer has no relationship with customer. What I need to do is find a way from the slicer to filter the customer. This requires generating a table that links the name with the data in the customer. In order to understand what the content of this table is, let's look back at the model that already contains the solution. This is the slicer table in the final solution. You see that slicer contains a selection, so the name that I choose from the slicer, and then country state. Country state is a key in the customer table that uniquely identifies the entity that I want to select. So when I select Alabama, I will actually select United States Alabama, a new key that I created in the customer table that represents all the customers living in United States Alabama. When I select Asia, I will not select only one value. I will select a lot of values in the country state: Armenia, Australia, Bhutan, China, and so on. These are the keys in the customer table, and this is the name that the user chooses from the slicer. Now, how do I create these keys? I need to find a proper key that works from the granularity point of view in the customer table. The perfect key, because I'm using 3 different columns, the continent, the country, and the state, so the perfect key should contain the continent, the country, and the state. Therefore, I will need to create a column in the customer table containing the concatenation of these 3 values and use that column in my slicer table to build the relationship. In our very special case, the continent is not needed because the country plus the state is enough to build a proper key to filter the data. In your scenario, if you are not handling geographical data, then you might need to have the 3 columns together. In our, it's enough to have country and state. So let's do that in the solution. We need again, well, we need first to create the column in customer. So we need to create a new column in customer. Let's do that from here. We create a new column that we call country state. Now, country state is the key in the customer table, and we use combine values separating by a pipe the country region and the state. This generates a column that contains United States, California, and all the combination of country region and state in the customer table. Next, we need to use this in our query in order to enrich the model. So I have the selection. I need to add also the country state. And I need to do that from here. Let's call it country state, which is the customer country state. I need here, here, and here again, with a few commas to fix the syntax. If I run the query now, you see I have the selection, North America, and the country states that will be selected when I choose North America. Then I have Europe that shows, where is my Europe? Okay. Now let's go for France, and I have the countries and the states, the provinces actually in France. Germany have all the provinces and so on for all the values. Now I can take this new version of the code and use it in my model. So I need to choose my slicer table and change the code. So that now it contains the selection and the country state. Now I have selection, country state, and in my report everything is still working because I just added a column. I didn't remove a column. Still, I need to make the relationship. In order to make the relationship, I now have the country state in the slicer and I have the country state in the customer table. So I can go straight and build a many-to-many cross-filter relationship. I take country state from here, drop it here, and I have a warning that says that the relationship has cardinality many-to-many. That is fine. I only need to fix that. I want slicer to filter customer. Click on OK. And now slicer is filtering customer at the country state level. So I'm showing selection, but the filter on selection cross-filter country state, which moves the filter to customer, which applies the filter to the model. Now I have China, Europe, Portugal. That is fine. I take the selection. I also need to add selection here. And now you see that the filter is happening. China, Europe, and Portugal is filtering Europe, China, and Portugal. If I get rid of Europe and I add Colorado, here you see that I have China, Colorado, Portugal, and the filtering is already working as expected. This model works just fine, and there are no issues with the model. You see that we didn't have to write code in measures. We just changed the data model. If the number of values that you have in the slicer table is small enough, that is good. You can go ahead with this solution that works just fine. But if the model has a lot of values, so there are a lot of values in that slicer table, then it is better to change this model a bit and build a proper many-to-many relationship, not relying on bidirectional cross-filter, but instead relying on physical relationships. Again, let's go to the original solution to understand what we did there, and then we'll replicate it in this solution. In this solution, what I did is creating an intermediate table. So right now, in the current solution we have implemented, the filter goes from slicer to customer straight. Here, in the solution that I prepared earlier, the filter goes from slicer to country state and then from country state to customer. And it is relying on two physical relationships, which are typically faster than many-to-many cross-filter relationships. How do I build the country state table? Well, country state need to have country state as a key. So it has all the distinct values of country state from the customer table. And once I have it, I will have a table that has the granularity of country state that can be the target of a relationship coming from slicer and from customer. Now that we have a better picture of what we want to implement, we can go here, remove this relationship, and build a proper table that we use for the physical relationship. We don't need DAX Studio now, because it's enough to write a simple table. The table is country state, and it just takes the distinct values of customer country state. Because I'm taking the distinct values, now country state in this table is a key. And because it's a key, I can use it as a target of relationships. I need to add it to the model. And now I can take country state and build a relationship. And then from here, country state builds the relationship again. So slicer is connected to country state, and country state is connected to slicer. If I look at my report, it is not yet working. And the reason is that the filter does not go from slicer to country state. The filter always goes from the one side to the many side, unless I enable bidirectional cross-filter. That's exactly what I'm doing here. I enable bidirectional cross-filter here. Click on OK. Go back to my report, and now it is working as expected. I have China, Colorado, Portugal, I can add Italy, and everything works exactly as I would have expected. So in order to build the complete solution, what I needed to do was create the slicer table, create the country state table, and create one column in the customer table. The column in the customer table need to have the proper granularity. Country states contains the country state as a key, and slicer contains the values, and then it is connected through the set of relationships. As you have seen, it was enough to build a proper set of tables to slightly change the data model to obtain an extremely powerful data model. From there, you can choose any entity regardless of the role, and this will apply a filter to the customer table. Of course, we used it in a geographical environment. You can use it in different scenarios to combine multiple columns into a single slicer that filters the value of a column regardless of the role. Remember that whenever you need to create complex models, the data modeling techniques are your best friends. Slight and simple changes to the data model provide a tremendous power in the quality of your reports. Enjoy DAX!